Under the fractured moon, a single snowflake traced the path of a fallen tear, whispering secrets the wind dared not carry. Thalia Fenn stood before the great hall of Eldridge Pack, the air thick with the scent of pine smoke and unspoken accusations. Her bare feet pressed against the frost-kissed stone, each crack in the floor mirroring the fissures in her resolve. She was no one, an omega without kin, her life a threadbare weave of servitude in the shadows of the Alpha's world. Yet tonight, under the watchful gaze of the silver orb above, she would unravel it all. The child trembled beside her, a wisp of a girl no older than 8, her wide eyes reflecting the torchlight like twin pools of midnight. Alara, they called her, found wandering the borders with blood on her hands, wolf's blood, fresh and accusing. The pack elders murmured of murder, of a rival scout slain in the night, his throat torn by small, desperate teeth. But Thalia knew the truth. The girl had only defended herself from the brute's grasp, her fangs bared in terror, not malice. Alara was no killer. She was a stray, perhaps, or worse. A secret the pack would devour to bury. "I did it," Thalia said, her voice steady as the winter river, though her heart thundered like distant drums. The words hung in the air, heavy as the iron chains they would soon bind her with. Gasps rippled through the gathered wolves, betas shifting uneasily, gammas narrowing their eyes. The Alpha, Lord Harlan, leaned forward on his throne of carved oak, his furred cloak pooling like spilled ink. His gaze was steel, unyielding. "You, an Omega, claiming the life of our scout?" His laugh was a low rumble, echoing off the vaulted ceilings where icicles dangled like frozen daggers. "Why?" Thalia's fingers tightened around the moonstone pendant at her throat. A simple thing, inherited from a mother she barely remembered, its pale glow catching the firelight. It had been her only anchor in a life of scraps and silence, a cool weight against her skin that now burned with the lie she wove. He came for me in the woods. I fought back. The girl saw nothing. She glanced at Alara, willing the child to stay silent, to let the deception take root. The hall erupted in chaos, shouts of outrage, the scrape of claws on stone. Harlan rose, his shadow swallowing the light. "Traitorous cur, for this you forfeit your place among us, exile to the frost veins, where the snow claims the unworthy." His decree was law, carved in the ancient rites under the moon's indifferent eye. No trial, no mercy for one who confessed so boldly. Thalia had bought the girl's freedom with her own chains. They dragged her out into the night, the wind howling like a chorus of lost souls. Snow swirled in furious eddies, stinging her cheeks as the pack's torches bobbed behind her like malevolent fireflies. Alara was led away to the safety of the inner dens, her small hand brushing Thalia's one last time, a fleeting warmth that seared like a brand. "Thank you," the child whispered. But Thalia only nodded, her throat too tight for words. The guards bound her wrists with rough rope, the fibers biting into her skin, drawing thin lines of blood that froze almost instantly in the biting cold. They marched her to the pack's edge, where the forest met the unforgiving mountains of the frost veins, a labyrinth of ice-cloaked peaks where blizzards sang eternal dirges and the weak were forgotten. "Survive if the goddess wills it," one guard snarled, shoving her forward. The other spat at her feet, his eyes gleaming with contempt. Then they were gone, their torches fading into the dark, leaving her alone with the moon's pale vigil. Thalia stumbled into the tree line, the snow swallowing her steps up to her ankles, then her knees. The wind clawed at her thin shift, tearing at the fabric until it hung in ragged strips, exposing skin to the merciless chill. Her breath came in white plumes, ragged and labored, as the weight of her confession settled like lead in her chest. Why had she done it? For a stranger's child, yes, but deeper still, for the flicker of something pure in Alara's eyes, a light untainted by the pack's cruelties. Thalia had known rejection all her life. Orphaned young, passed between households like a burdensome heirloom. This was merely the final severing, the exile that stripped her bare. The moonstone at her throat pulsed faintly, or perhaps it was her imagination, a cool thrum against the fire of her veins. She clutched it, drawing strength from its unyielding curve as if it held the goddess's own breath. The forest loomed, ancient pines bowing under snow's burden, their branches whispering secrets of forgotten omegas who had wandered these paths. Weaved distant howls pierced the night, rogue wolves perhaps, or the wind's cruel mimicry. Blood from her wrists trickled down, staining the snow in crimson petals that bloomed and vanished in the gale. Hours blurred into a haze of cold and motion. Her limbs grew heavy, the world tilting as exhaustion clawed at her edges. She collapsed against a jagged rock, its ice-veined surface biting into her palm. In the silence that followed, broken only by her shallow breaths, doubt crept in like frost. What crime had she truly committed? Not the murder, but the lie that bound her to this wilderness, a confession that echoed her life's quiet rebellions. Strength, she thought, was not in fangs or fury, but in choosing silence for another's dawn. As the moon climbed higher, casting silver shards across the drifts, Thalia rose once more. The frost veins stretched before her, a white abyss promising death or, perhaps, rebirth. She pressed on, the moonstone her solitary companion, its glow a defiant spark against the encroaching dark. Little did she know, in the shadows of those peaks, another soul wandered, broken, guilt-ridden, seeking redemption under the same lunar gaze. The wind carved invisible wounds into Thalia's skin as she pushed deeper into the frost veins, each step a defiance against the numbness creeping through her bones. The moonstone pendant swung like a pendulum at her throat, its cool surface a faint anchor amid the chaos of swirling snow. It caught slivers of lunar light, casting ethereal glimmers that danced across the endless white, as if the goddess herself traced a path through the desolation. Her confession echoed in her mind, not the lie spoken in the hall, but the deeper truth of her isolation, a life spent shielding flickers of light from the pack's encroaching shadows. Now, exiled, she was adrift in a world that devoured the vulnerable, her body a vessel for the cold's relentless hunger. Hours bled into the night, or perhaps it was dawn's cruel tease, veiled by the storm's fury. Thalia's vision blurred, the pines looming as spectral guardians, their branches laden with ice that snapped like brittle bones under the gale's assault. A distant howl pierced the roar, raw, agonized, not the wind's mimicry this time, but a wolf's cry, laced with pain. She froze, her pulse quickening, instincts warring between flight and the pull of that sound. Omegas were prey in these wilds, their sense a beacon for rogues and beasts alike. Yet something in the howl stirred her, a resonance, like the moonstone's thrum against her chest, urging her forward. She veered toward the sound, her ragged shift tearing further on thorns hidden beneath the drifts. Blood welled from shallow cuts on her legs, warm for a fleeting moment before the frost claimed it, staining the snow in fleeting crimson arcs. The howl came again, closer, ragged with exhaustion. Thalia crested a ridge, her breath a labored fog, and there, in a shallow hollow cradled by jagged boulders, she found him. He was a ruin of fur and fury, sprawled against the ice-veined rock, his massive form half buried in snow, an alpha by the sheer power etched into his frame even in collapse, broad shoulders scarred by old battles, fur matted with blood that seeped from a fresh gash across his flank. His eyes, when they snapped open at her approach, burned with the gold of ancient fire, wild and wary. But beneath that ferocity lay a hollow, a melancholy that mirrored her own exile. He was no rogue. The faded insignia on his torn cloak spoke of royalty, a crown woven in silver thread now frayed by the storm. Thalia's instincts recoiled, her body coiling like a spring. Alphas were storms incarnate, their presence a command that bent wills. Yet fear tangled with an unwelcome curiosity, a pull deep in her core that she shoved down, rationalizing it as survival's trick. He could kill her, claim her as easy meat in this forsaken place. But his gaze held no hunger for dominance, only a guarded plea, shadowed by guilt that hung heavier than the snow. "Stay back," he growled, voice gravel rough, laced with the effort of shifting to his human form. Fur receded in waves, revealing a man of weathered strength, his dark hair streaked with frost, face etched by lines of unspoken burdens. Blood trickled from the wound, pooling dark against the white, and he pressed a hand to it, wincing as crimson seeped between his fingers. "This is no place for whatever you are." Thalia hesitated, the wind whipping her hair like raven banners. She should run, leave this wounded king to the elements, preserve her fragile solitude. But the moonstone warmed against her skin, an inexplicable pulse that synced with the ragged rhythm of his breaths. "You're bleeding out," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs. Not pity, she told herself, but pragmatism. A dead alpha might draw scavengers, endangering her flight. She edged closer, scanning the hollow for threats, only shadows and the faint scent of pine sap mingling with his blood. He watched her approach, muscles tensing, but made no move to strike. Up close, the guilt in his eyes was a chasm, deep as the frost vein's crevasses. Oren Bale, though she did not yet know his name, carried the weight of a throne fractured by secrets. His daughter, Ilara, the very child Thalia had shielded, lost to him years ago in a web of political betrayals, hidden away to protect her from rivals who coveted his crown. Now, whispers of her discovery had driven him from his halls, a fugitive king haunted by the duty that had severed his bloodline. The wound was no accident. Assassin's blades in the pass, sent by those who smelled weakness in his divided heart. Thalia knelt at a cautious distance, tearing a strip from her shift to press against his side. The fabric soaked through instantly, warm and sticky, the metallic tang of blood filling her nostrils. His hand shot out, gripping her wrist, not cruelly, but firm, a warning that sent sparks through her veins. Their eyes met, and in that instant, the world narrowed. The storm's howl faded, leaving only the visceral thump of hearts, the moon's silver gaze upon them. Instinct whispered of bonds forged in moonlight, of omegas and alphas entwined by fate's cruel thread. But she denied it, fear curdling the curiosity into suspicion. What did this stranger want from her, broken as she was? "Leave me," he murmured, releasing her with a reluctance that mirrored her own inner war. Yet his gaze lingered, tracing the moonstone's glow at her throat, as if it held answers to riddles he dared not voice. The pendant seemed to hum, a subtle vibration that bridged the space between them, drawing forth an empathy she could not name. Thalia pulled back, wiping bloodied hands on the snow, watching as it melted into pink rivulets. The connection lingered, unspoken and resisted, a spark in the cold, born of shared exile, yet fragile as the first thaw. She rose, the wind reclaiming its fury, but turned not away. In the alpha's shadowed eyes, she glimpsed a reflection of her own confession, a lie to protect what was precious, a guilt that bound tighter than chains. As the moon dipped toward the horizon, painting the drifts in ghostly hues, Thalia made her choice, not of the heart, but of the moment. She would stay, if only to witness what redemption looked like in a king's unraveling form. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The storm's fury abated as dawn clawed its way through the clouds, painting the frost veins in hues of bruised lavender and steel gray. Thalia huddled in the hollow's lee, the jagged boulders forming a crude barrier against the wind's lingering teeth. The alpha, Orin, he had finally rasped, his voice a gravel echo of forgotten thrones, lay still beside her, his breathing shallow but steadied by the crude bandage she had fashioned from her tattered shift. Blood had crusted the fabric, a dark bloom against her pale skin, and the metallic scent clung to her like a shadow, mingling with the crisp bite of pine and ice. She watched him in the half-light, her fingers tracing the moonstone's smooth curve at her throat. It had warmed through the night, an unnatural pulse that seemed to sync with his heartbeat, faint and erratic as a trapped bird's wings. Empathy stirred unbidden, a treacherous warmth in her chest. For this stranger who carried wounds deeper than the gash in his side, his eyes haunted by ghosts she could almost name. He was no mere wanderer. The silver crown thread in his cloak whispered of power lost, of duties that devoured the soul. Yet in his vulnerability, he mirrored her own exile, two fractures drawn together by the moon's indifferent pull. Orin's eyes fluttered open, gold flecks catching the weak light like embers in ash. He shifted, wincing as the movement tugged at his wound, and his gaze found hers, wary, yet laced with a gratitude he would not voice. "You should have left," he murmured, propping himself against the rock with a grunt. Snow dusted his dark hair, melting into rivulets that traced the sharp lines of his jaw. "The wilds claim the foolish who linger." Thalia met his stare, her own resolve hardening against the chill that seeped into her bones. "And leave you to bleed out? The scavengers would find us both by scent." It was half-truth. Pragmatism armored her words, but beneath lay the curiosity that had rooted her here, the instinctive tug toward this broken king. She rose, scanning the ridge above, where the wind sculpted drifts into treacherous waves. The howl from last night echoed in her mind, not his alone, but a prelude to greater threats. Rogues prowled these peaks, drawn by blood and weakness, and the pack's exile decree might as well have painted a target on her back. He nodded, accepting her aid without protest, a silent concession that bridged the chasm between them. Together, they moved deeper into the hollow, where a narrow crevice yawned like the goddess's own maw, promising shelter from the exposing light. Thalia led, her bare feet numb against the frozen earth, each step sending jolts of pain up her legs. Orin followed, leaning on her more than pride allowed, his weight a solid heat that pierced the cold. Their scents mingled, her subtle wildflower undertone with his storm-salted musk, forging an invisible thread that hummed with unspoken potential. The crevice widened into a cavern, its walls veined with quartz that gleamed like captured moonlight. Icicles dangled from the ceiling, refracting the pale glow into prisms that danced across the floor. Thalia gathered brittle branches from the entrance, her hands trembling as she coaxed a fire to life with flint scavenged from Orin's pouch. Sparks flew, hesitant at first, then bloomed into flames that licked the air with greedy tongues. The warmth was a revelation, chasing the frost from her skin, and she watched as color returned to Orin's face, the pallor yielding to a flush of life. He sat across from her, the firelight carving shadows that deepened the melancholy in his features. "Why help a dying wolf?" he asked, his voice low, threaded with the weight of confessions long buried. The flames crackled, underscoring the silence that followed, broken only by the distant drip of melting ice. Thalia poked at the embers, watching sparks ascend like fleeing souls. "I've confessed to enough shadows in my life. One more debt won't break me." Her words carried the echo of the great hall, the lie that had bound her to this fate. But as she spoke, the moonstone thrummed again, drawing his gaze to it, a beacon in the dim, its pale light pulsing in rhythm with the fire's glow. She felt exposed under his scrutiny, the pendant a bridge between their guarded hearts. Orin leaned forward, the movement stirring the air with his scent, rich and commanding yet tempered by vulnerability. That stone. It sings to the blood. His fingers brushed his wound, now staunched, and for the first time, a flicker of wonder softened his guilt-shadowed eyes. Empathy bloomed there, tentative as the first thaw, recognizing in her the quiet strength that had saved him from the storm's embrace. Before she could respond, a low growl rumbled from the entrance, a guttural warning that shattered the fragile peace. Thalia's instincts flared, her body coiling as shadows shifted beyond the fire's reach. Rogues, 3 of them, their eyes glowing amber in the gloom, muzzles curled in snarls that bared yellowed fangs. Drawn by the blood trail, they circled, the largest, a scarred brute with a notched ear, testing the air with a sniff that ended in a triumphant huff. They were packless predators, lean and feral, their fur ragged from endless winters. Orin surged to his feet, a snarl ripping from his throat, his form rippling with the shift to wolf, massive, midnight-furred, eyes blazing gold. But the wound weakened him, his movements labored as the first rogue lunged. Thalia's heart thundered, fear a visceral knot, yet she did not flee. Instead, she grabbed a burning branch from the fire, the flames searing her palm as she swung it like a torch of defiance. The rogue yelped, singed fur smoking, and veered back, giving Orin space to counter. They fought as one, an instinctive harmony born of the moment's desperation. Orin barreled into the brute, jaws clamping on its shoulder with a crack of bone, blood spraying hot and coppery across the snow-dusted floor. Thalia whirled, her improvised weapon a arc of fire that drove the second rogue into the wall, its howl echoing off the quartz veins. The third circled her, eyes fixed on her throat, but she met its gaze, the moonstone flaring bright against her skin, a sudden, ethereal light that made the beast hesitate, whining as if scorched by unseen force. Orin dispatched the brute with a final, savage twist, his chest heaving as he shifted back, blood matting his human form. The remaining rogues fled into the storm, their yips fading into the wind. He turned to her, breath ragged, and in his eyes burned not just survival's fire, but a bond forged in shared blood and flame. "You fought," he said, awe threading his voice, reaching out to steady her as the branch fell from numb fingers. Thalia's hand met his, the contact electric, empathy swelling into something deeper, a tether of trust amid the carnage. The cavern reeked of singed fur and spilled life, the fire's warmth now a sanctuary they had defended together. As the moonstone cooled against her skin, its glow dimming to a steady pulse, she realized the refuge was no longer just stone and flame, but the fragile alliance blooming between them, resistant yet undeniable. In that silence, broken only by their synced breaths, the weight of their pasts lightened, if only for a breath, 2 exiles finding solace in the other's unyielding gaze. The cavern's quartz veins pulsed with the fire's dying embers, casting fractured light across the blood-streaked floor like shards of a shattered vow. Thalia's palm throbbed from the burn, a raw ache that mirrored the deeper fire kindling in her chest. A bond she dared not name, forged in the heat of rogue fangs and shared defiance. Orin's gaze lingered on her, gold-flecked and searching, as if he could unravel the threads of her soul with a single look. The air hung heavy with the tang of scorched fur and iron-rich blood. The silence between them a fragile truce, broken only by the distant drip of melting ice and the wind's mournful sigh beyond the entrance. She withdrew her hand from his, the contact lingering like a phantom warmth, and turned to the fire, feeding it fresh branches with trembling fingers. The flames roared back to life, hungry tongues licking at the shadows, illuminating the scars that mapped Orin's body like ancient runes, tales of battles won and thrones bartered in blood. He shifted closer, his presence a gravitational pull, the musk of his skin mingling with the smoke to create an intoxicating haze. "That light in your stone," he said, voice low and resonant, like thunder rolling over frozen peaks. "It blinded the beast. How?" Thalia's fingers brushed the moonstone instinctively, its surface now cool and still, as if sated by the night's violence. Inherited from a mother lost to the pack's cruelties, it had always been a quiet companion, a talisman against the world's indifference, glowing faintly on nights when the moon wept silver tears. But tonight, it had flared, a sudden radiance that pierced the rogue's eyes like lunar judgment, driving it back with a whimper of primal fear. She had felt it then, a surge deep within, like roots stirring in barren soil, awakening something dormant, hidden even from herself. "It's nothing," she murmured, rationalizing the impossible, her voice a threadbare veil over the unease blooming in her gut. Omegas bore no such gifts. They were vessels of quiet endurance, not wielders of light. Orin did not press, but his eyes narrowed, tracing the pendant's curve where it rested against her collarbone, rising and falling with her quickened breaths. The cavern seemed to shrink around them, the quartz walls echoing with unspoken histories. His, of a crown heavy with secrets, hers, of confessions that chained the innocent. He rose slowly, testing his wound, the makeshift bandage stained but holding, and paced to the entrance, peering into the swirling dusk where snow devils danced under the moon's watchful eye. "The rogues were no accident," he confessed, his back to her, shoulders taut as bowstrings. "They followed my blood, but others will come. My past. It hunts me like a shadow with teeth." Thalia watched him, empathy coiling tighter, a vine that threatened to bind her resolve. She had glimpsed fragments in his fevered mutterings through the night, whispers of a daughter stolen by politics, hidden to shield her from the vipers nesting in his court. Elara. The name had slipped from his lips like a prayer, igniting a spark of recognition she could not place, buried beneath layers of her own exile. The moonstone warmed again, subtly at first, then insistent, syncing with the rhythm of her pulse. She clutched it, willing the sensation away, but it only intensified, drawing visions unbidden, flashes of a child's face in torchlight, wide eyes pleading, blood on small hands. Her breath hitched, the cavern tilting, as if the earth itself shifted. The stone blazed then, a supernova of pale fire that flooded the space, illuminating every crevice with ethereal clarity. Thalia gasped, dropping to her knees as the light poured through her, not just from the pendant but from within. A cascade of lunar essence that hummed in her veins, revealing hidden truths. Images assaulted her. Orin's throne room, rife with betrayal, a rival alpha's sneer as he claimed the child's crime to fracture the king's line. Elara, not a stray, but blood of his blood, concealed in the pack's fringes to evade assassins. And Thalia herself, her confession in the great hall, a unwitting thread in the goddess's weave, saving the air by dooming herself to this frozen crossroads. Orin whirled, his face bathed in the glow, eyes widening in revelation. You're the Pathfinder," he breathed, the words a sacred invocation, laced with awe and dawning hope. Legend spoke of Omegas marked by the moon, seers who unraveled destinies knotted by deceit, their gifts blooming in moments of purest peril. He knelt before her, not as king but as supplicant, his hand hovering near the stone without touching, as if it might shatter under profane fingers. "The child I lost, Elara, she's alive because of you, your light. It shows me the way back." Thalia reeled, the visions fading as the stone dimmed, leaving her drained, the cold rushing in like a vengeful tide. Fear warred with a profound sorrow. This gift was no blessing, but a curse that bound her to fates greater than her own fragile existence. She had confessed for a stranger's mercy, not to unearth royal secrets that could drag her into wars of claw and crown. "I saw nothing," she lied, voice cracking like thin ice, pulling away from his intensity. But the bond thrummed between them, undeniable now, her empathy a mirror to his guilt, revealing how her exile had intersected his path like comets in the night sky. Outside, a howl rose, not rogue, but pack, distant yet purposeful, carrying the scent of pursuit on the wind. Oren's face hardened, the melancholy yielding to resolve, his gaze locking on hers with a weight that promised upheaval. "You are the key," he said softly, the words a vow etched in moonlight. "To my redemption, to hers. Deny it if you must, but the moon has chosen." Thalia rose, the stone's afterglow lingering in her skin like a brand, the cavern's sanctuary fracturing under the press of destiny. Strength, she thought, was not in hiding the light, but in facing what it illuminated, a choice between her hard-won solitude and the throne's shadowed embrace. As the howls drew nearer, blood and fire their harbingers, she met his eyes, the first crack in her resistance forming, fragile as frost under dawn's touch. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your worth. The howls crescendoed into a symphony of vengeance, slicing through the cavern's fragile hush like claws on frozen bone. Thalia's skin prickled, the moonstone's residual warmth a mocking comfort against the encroaching chill that heralded not just pursuit, but reckoning. Oren's hand tightened on her arm, his touch a anchor and a chain, pulling her from the sanctuary's deceptive embrace into the storm's maw. "We face them now," he said, his voice a low thunder, etched with the resolve of a king reclaiming his fractured crown. The gold in his eyes flared, not with dominance, but with the raw plea of a father haunted by years of absence, his guilt a blade turned inward. They emerged from the crevice into a world remade by twilight's blade. Snow-laden pines bowing like supplicants under the moon's ascendant gaze, their branches heavy with crystalline veils that shattered in the wind's savage breath. The air reeked of damp fur and iron-tanged earth, the pack's scent a tidal wave crashing against Thalia's senses, stirring memories of the great hall's suffocating judgment. Her bare feet sank into the drifts, each step a numb communion with the frozen ground, blood from earlier cuts seeping anew to paint fleeting scarlet signatures in the white. The moonstone pulsed at her throat, a rhythmic warning, as if the goddess herself urged her to witness the unraveling of lies woven tighter than wolf pelts. From the ridge above, they descended, Lord Harlan and his betas, shadows coalescing into forms of snarling might, their eyes aglow with the pack's unyielding law. At their forefront loped a rival alpha, Victor, his pelt scarred by old feuds, a usurper whose ambitions had long festered like untreated wounds. He was the traitor Oren had fled, the one who had orchestrated Ilara's disappearance years ago, whispering poisons into the court's ears to claim the throne through blood and deceit. Victor's muzzle curled in a triumphant snarl, his gaze locking on Oren with predatory glee, then shifting to Thalia, dismissive, as if she were mere chaff in the wind. "You dare return, exile?" Harlan bellowed, his human form shifting mid-stride to tower in furred menace, claws extended like obsidian daggers. The pack fanned out, encircling the hollow in a noose of bared fangs and rumbling growls, torches sputtering in the gale to cast flickering hellfire across the snow. The goddess reviles kings who abandon their blood, and you, Omega, your confession was a farce, a shield for this whelp's spawn. Ilara's crime stains us all. Your light won't blind justice. Oren's snarl ripped through the night, his body rippling into wolf form. Midnight black, massive, the wound on his flank a crimson slash that only fueled his fury. He lunged forward, positioning himself between Thalia and the encroaching wall of wolves, his hackles raised like a crown of thorns. Blood sprayed as he clashed with the first beta, jaws locking in a visceral symphony of crunching bone and guttural roars, the metallic spray arcing through the air to mingle with falling snowflakes. Thalia's heart hammered, a visceral drum echoing the chaos, her instincts screaming to flee into the peak's labyrinthine embrace. Freedom beckoned in the shadows, a solitary path where no bonds could claim her, no royal tempests could shatter her hard-won solitude. Yet the moonstone blazed, its light erupting in a corona that bathed the fray in ethereal silver, halting the pack mid-lunge. Visions assaulted her again, flashes of Victor's betrayal, his claws rending the veil of secrecy around Alara, forcing the child into the wilds to frame her as a murderer and fracture Oren's line. The stone's gift revealed the moral rot at the pack's core. Harlan, unwitting pawn in Victor's game, enforcing exile not for justice, but to bury the king's return. Thalia gasped, the cold air searing her lungs as empathy surged, a torrent that drowned her resistance, binding her to Oren's fight as surely as the pendant's glow tethered their fates. Victor shifted to human, his laugh a guttural bark that cut through the melee. "The Pathfinder awakens in a traitor's shell," he sneered, circling with calculated grace, his eyes gleaming with the avarice of one who craved not just power, but the annihilation of rivals. "Your light shows truths, Omega. Then see this. Oren's daughter lives only as long as she serves my claim. Surrender him, and perhaps I'll spare your worthless hide." His words were venom, laced with the promise of war, a throne soaked in the blood of innocence, forgiveness a luxury for the weak. Thalia's world narrowed to the fire in her veins, the snow's bite on her skin, the wind's howl mingling with the pack's chorus. Oren broke free from the betas, bloodied but unbowed, his golden eyes meeting hers across the carnage, a silent entreaty, not for victory, but for choice, love or freedom. The bond thrummed, resistant no longer, a redemptive fire that whispered of healing wounds deeper than flesh. To run was to reclaim her exile, to let the pack devour Oren and reclaim Alara as a pawn. To stay was to embrace war, to wield her light as a weapon of compassion, forgiving the past's cruelties by forging a new path through forgiveness's thorns. She stepped forward, the moonstone's radiance swelling, a lunar beacon that pierced the storm and forced Victor to shield his eyes with a hiss. "Strength is not in conquest," she declared, her voice carrying like the wind's own decree, steady despite the tremor in her limbs. "It's in mercy's blade, cutting ties that bind the innocent." The words were philosophy etched in blood, a dilemma that tore at her soul. Pardon the traitor's ambition, or ignite the war that could free them all. Oren roared, charging Victor in a blur of fur and fury, their bodies colliding with the impact of colliding worlds, king against pretender, guilt against greed. Claws raked deep, blood blooming in dark petals across the snow, the air thick with the coppery reek and the visceral snap of sinew. Thalia moved with them, her light guiding Oren's strikes. Blinding betas who lunged too close, her presence a shield woven from the stone's ancient power. The pack faltered, Harlan's growl turning to doubt as the visions bled into their minds, fragments of Victor's deceit, Ilara's true lineage laid bare under the moon's unblinking eye. Victor staggered, a gash across his throat weeping crimson, his eyes wide with the shock of exposed lies. "You'd choose him? For what? Redemption's illusion?" He spat, collapsing to his knees in the drifts, the snow drinking his life like a parched earth. Thalia knelt beside Oren as the pack retreated, howls fracturing into whimpers of retreat, Harlan's form vanishing into the tree line with a final conflicted glance. The king shifted back, his chest heaving, wounds knitting slowly under the moonstone's glow, but his gaze on her was a chasm of unspoken debt. "You could have run," he murmured, his hand brushing hers, the contact a spark that ignited the choice's weight. Freedom slipped away like melting ice, replaced by the tether of love's redemptive proof, not a reward, but a trial forged in blood and choice. In the aftermath's hush, as the wind carried away the echoes of battle, Thalia felt the ethical precipice. Forgiveness might heal the pack's fractures, inviting war's mercy. War might shatter them all, claiming liberty at love's expense. The moonstone cooled, its light a quiet witness, leaving her heart suspended in the dilemma's frozen grasp. A spiritual crossroads where compassion's path gleamed faint against the allure of solitary shadows. The snow drank the last echoes of battle, its pristine veil now marred by crimson furrows that steamed faintly in the sub-zero air, as if the earth itself mourned the spilled life. Thalia knelt in the drifts, her knees numb against the unyielding cold, the moonstone's glow fading to a subdued ember at her throat, a weary sentinel after the frenzy of light and claw. Oren's breath ragged beside her, his form slumped against a pine's gnarled trunk, the rival's blood streaking his chest like war paint etched in accusation. Victor's body lay twisted in the hollow, eyes vacant under the moon's indifferent scrutiny, his ambition extinguished not by fury alone, but by the revelations that had fractured the pack's loyalty. Harlan and the Betas had fled into the shadowed ridges, their howls splintering into uncertainty, leaving the night to whisper of divided allegiances and truths too sharp to ignore. Thalia's hands trembled as she pressed them to Oren's wounds, the warmth of his blood seeping through her fingers, a visceral reminder of the choice that had bound them in this frozen crucible. The air hung thick with the metallic tang and the acrid bite of singed fur, the wind weaving through the pines like a dirge for the fallen. Her heart thundered, not from fear now, but from the precipice's edge, the moral chasm yawning before her, where forgiveness dangled like a frayed thread and war loomed as an inevitable storm. She had wielded the moonstone's gift not for glory, but for the child's sake, for Alara's hidden light that mirrored her own buried innocence. Yet in illuminating Victor's deceit, she had ignited a pyre that could consume them all. The pack's fractures might heal under Mercy's hand or splinter into civil strife, claiming innocence in its wake. Oren stirred, his golden eyes finding hers through the haze of pain, their depths a tempest of gratitude and torment. He reached for her, his calloused palm cupping her cheek, the contact a spark that pierced the chill, igniting the bond they had resisted so fiercely. "You chose," he murmured, voice gravel rough, laced with the melancholy of a king who had long bartered his soul for duty. "Not freedom, but this, us against the tide." His touch lingered, tracing the line of her jaw, and in that moment, the world narrowed to the heat of his skin against hers, the subtle thrum of the moonstone syncing with their pulses like a shared heartbeat under the lunar vault. She leaned into it, despite the rational voice screaming of sacrifice, the life she might have reclaimed in solitary exile, unburdened by crowns and confessions. Empathy flooded her, a redemptive tide that washed away the barriers of fear and denial. Oren's guilt was a mirror to her own, his years of absence from Alara, enforced by political webs to shield her from assassins, echoed her confession in the great hall, a lie born of compassion that had cost her everything. The moonstone warmed, not with visions now, but with a gentle assurance, as if the goddess affirmed the path of healing over vengeance. "Mercy isn't weakness," she whispered, her breath mingling with his in white plumes, the words of philosophy forged in the night's blood. "It's the fire that tempers the blade, choosing union over the abyss." He pulled her closer, their foreheads touching, the scent of pine sap and iron weaving around them like an invisible cloak. The wind howled distantly, carrying faint weavos from the retreating pack, echoes of doubt perhaps, or the first stirrings of redemption. Oren's free hand found the moonstone, hovering reverently before brushing it, and a soft glow bloomed anew, bathing their faces in silver that chased the shadows from his scars. "Elara lives because of you," he said, the confession a vow, his voice breaking on the child's name. "My daughter, hidden in your pack's fringes, her crime a veil to protect her from men like Victor. You've healed what I shattered, given me a chance to be more than a ghost on a throne." Thalia's throat tightened, tears freezing on her lashes like crystalline stars. The revelation settled deep, a rebirth stirring in her core. Not of power, but of belonging, the Omega's quiet strength blooming into something transcendent. She had lost her place among the pack, her identity reduced to a confessed shadow, but here, in this king's unraveling gaze, she found purpose, not as savior or pawn, but as equal in the dance of fate. The bond solidified, no longer resisted, but embraced, a union born of shared wounds, where love proved itself through trial, not ease. Her fingers intertwined with his, the blood on their skin mingling, a symbolic seal under the moon's witness. Yet the night was not done with its tests. From the tree line emerged a lone figure, Harlan, his form human now, cloak torn and eyes shadowed by conflict. He approached warily, claws retracted, the torch in his hand sputtering like a hesitant flame. "The light showed us," he said, voice hoarse, glancing at Victor's corpse with a grimace of dawning horror. "The traitor's web. Ilara's bloodline. The pack teeters, King Orin. Some howl for your head, others for alliance. What mercy do you offer a fool who enforced the lie?" Orin rose, drawing Thalia with him, his arm a steady pillar around her waist. The moonstone pulsed brighter, illuminating Harlan's face, etching lines of regret into his features. Thalia felt the weight of the choice extend beyond them, to heal the pack's soul or let war's fire purge it clean. "Forgiveness," Orin replied, his tone steady as ancient stone, but earned in blood's echo. "Bring Ilara to me. Let the child judge the throne's worth." Harlan nodded, a flicker of hope piercing his melancholy, before vanishing into the gloom, his steps crunching softly on the snow. As silence reclaimed the hollow, Thalia turned to Orin, their breaths sinking in the quiet. The wind softened, snowflakes drifting like benedictions, and in his eyes she saw the rebirth they shared. A king's guilt transmuted into resolve, an Omega's exile into destiny's embrace. Sacrifice had paved this path, her confession, his flight, the blood under the moon. But union rose from the ashes, a healing flame that promised not reward, but renewal. The moonstone settled against her skin, cool and content, as if the goddess smiled upon their fragile vow. Yet doubt lingered, a spiritual whisper in the night's hush. What price would this healing demand? As distant howls harmonized into a tentative chorus, Thalia clung to the warmth of his side, the dilemma's embers glowing faint. In choosing love, had they forged peace or merely delayed the storm's true fury? The peaks loomed, silent judges, while the moon arced toward dawn, casting their entwined shadows long across the bloodied snow, a testament to choices that bound souls in eternal, redemptive light. The first blush of dawn bled across the frost veins, turning the snowfields into a canvas of rose and ash, where the night's bloodstains faded like half-remembered sins. Thalia stood at the hollow's edge, the wind's whisper now a gentle caress against her skin, carrying the faint, hopeful scent of pine resin and distant hearth fires. The moonstone at her throat rested cool and quiescent, its glow subdued as if the goddess had drawn breath, allowing the world a moment's reprieve. Orin's arm encircled her waist, a steady warmth that anchored her against the precipice of what dawn might bring. Reunion or ruin, healing or the final unraveling of all she had sacrificed. Her heart, once a solitary drum in the silence of exile, now echoed his. A rhythm forged in the crucible of confession and claw, where love had emerged not as a balm, but as the raw proof of endurance. She had rationalized it through the long night, his touch a mere survival's echo, his gaze a trick of lunar light. But acceptance bloomed now, inevitable as the thaw, wrapping around her like the soft pelt he had draped over her shoulders. Rejection had stripped her bare, leaving only the moonstone's unyielding truth. In its light, she saw not loss, but the rebirth of purpose, an Omega's quiet fire kindling the king's shadowed throne. Footsteps crunched through the drifts, deliberate and unhurried, shattering the fragile hush. Harlan emerged from the tree line, his form bowed under the weight of contrition, eyes downcast like a beta before judgment. Beside him walked Alara, the child a vision of fragile resilience, her small hand clutching a tattered cloak, wide eyes reflecting the dawn's tentative glow. No blood marred her now. Instead, a faint scar traced her palm, a silver crescent that mirrored the moonstone's curve. Thalia's breath caught, the stone pulsing once, sharply, as if recognizing kin, a hidden lineage, the goddess's subtle mark on the heir who had sparked this odyssey of lies and light. Alara's gaze found Orin first, a spark of recognition igniting in her midnight depths. "Father?" The word was a whisper, fragile as frost, yet it cleaved the air like a blade, drawing forth a sob from the king's throat. Raw, unkingly, the sound of guilt fracturing under mercy's weight. He knelt, snow blooming around his knees, arms opening not in command, but in supplication. The child hesitated. The pack's shadows lingering in her stance, then rushed forward, burying her face in his chest. Their embrace was a sacrament, blood and tears mingling on furred cloth, the wind carrying their scents into harmony, storm musk and wildflower, now entwined with the innocent bloom of spring earth. Thalia watched, her chest aching with a joy laced in sorrow, the ethical echo of her choice reverberating through her bones. She had confessed for this moment, dooming herself to the wilds to shield a stranger's light, only to find it was destiny's thread pulling her home. Harlan stepped forward, his voice gravel rough with the night's confessions. "The pack fractures no more. Victor's web unraveled in your light, Omega. Some howl for war, others for the old ways, but Alara's truth binds them. Mercy, it crowns you both." His eyes met Thalia's, a nod of deference passing between them, the rival's defeat transmuted into alliance, compassion's quiet victory over power's grasp. Orin rose, Alara clasped to his side, and turned to Thalia, his free hand extending, a bridge across the chasm of their shared wounds. "You are no exile," he said, voice resonant as ancient oaths, gold eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "You are the heart of this redemption, the pathfinder who lit the way through despair's veil. Join us, not as servant or savior, but as queen to our fractured realm." The words hung in the crisp air, heavy with the weight of union, a proposal etched not in gold, but in the blood they had spilled under the moon's gaze. Thalia's fingers trembled as she took his hand, the contact electric, sealing the bond that had simmered through storm and shadow. Love, resisted and rationalized, now bloomed fully, a redemptive flame proving itself in sacrifice's forge, where freedom yielded to the deeper liberty of healed souls. The moonstone warmed against her skin, its light flaring softly, enveloping the three in a silver nimbus that chased the last shadows from the hollow. Visions flickered at the edges of her mind, not burdens now, but promises, a pack reborn under compassionate rule, Alara's laughter echoing through ice-veined halls, Orin's guilt alchemized into wise stewardship. Thalia felt the rebirth stir within, her Omega essence no longer confined to silence, but elevated, a force that balanced the throne's steel with mercy's grace. The wind sighed approval, snowflakes swirling in celebratory eddies, while distant howls joined in a chorus of tentative harmony, the frost veins yielding their eternal dirge to something warmer, more alive. Yet even in this dawn's embrace, a spiritual whisper lingered, the faith that had warred with despair, now affirming that destiny was no chain, but a choice freely made. Thalia leaned into Orin, Ilara's small hand slipping into hers, their triad a bastion against the peak's looming trials. Blood had baptized them, fire had tested them, and the moon had witnessed their ascent from rejection's ashes. Union was their rebirth, a testament that every wound could heal, every confession redeem under the goddess's eternal vigil. As the sun crested fully, gilding the snow in golden fire, they turned toward the distant spires of Eldridge Pack, home reclaimed not through conquest, but through the profound choice of compassion's crown. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.